The moment the golem's fist comes down on me, the entire arena goes dead silent. I'm supposed to be dying right now. That's the whole point. 300 students are packed into the stands, and every single one of them showed up to watch the cursed necromancer get flattened by a 12-foot stone construct built to test S-rank swordsmen. Nobody expected me to survive the first hit. Half of them are probably disappointed the fight didn't end in the first 3 seconds. I catch the fist with one hand. The ground cracks under my boots. Dust explodes outward in a ring. Somewhere in the crowd, a goblet hits the floor and shatters, and nobody moves to pick it up. That's not possible, someone whispers, loud enough that I hear it from 30 feet away. I look up at the golem, still holding its fist an inch from my face, and I smile. Not because I'm confident, because I finally get to stop pretending. My turn, I say. 6 months ago, if you told me I'd be standing in the middle of the Ashvane Academy arena, holding back a stone golem with one hand, while the strongest bloodline students in the kingdom watched with their jaws on the floor, I would have laughed in your face. 6 months ago, I was the joke of the entire first-year class. The kid nobody wanted on their team, the kid teachers pitied instead of respected, because 6 months ago, everyone thought they knew exactly what I was. A necromancer. And not just any necromancer, the worst-ranked one in Academy history. My name is Soren Duskmere, and to understand how I ended up crushing stone with my bare hands in front of the entire school, you need to understand what a necromancer is actually supposed to be. Weak. Fragile. Hidden in the back row of every fight, summoning skeletons and shades while stronger classes protect them, because a necromancer without bodyguards is a necromancer with a very short life expectancy. That's not an insult. That's the class description, straight from the system itself. Necromancers pour every stat point into intelligence and mana. Strength is basically a joke stat for them. A necromancer with high strength is like a fish with legs. Technically possible, completely pointless, and everyone assumes something went wrong in the design. So when I woke up on class awakening day and the system offered me my class selection, and the golden light above my head spelled out necromancer in floating letters, half my village actually laughed. My own neighbors. People I'd known my whole life. Because everyone remembered the last necromancer who awakened in our village, 20 years ago, and everyone remembered how he died, overwhelmed in his first real fight because he had no muscle, no speed, no way to defend himself once his mana ran dry. I was 11 years old, standing in the town square in front of the whole village, wearing the plain ceremonial robe every child wore for their awakening, and I remember the exact feeling of that golden light settling over my shoulders, like a weight instead of a blessing. Other kids that year had walked away with warm applause. A girl 2 houses down awakened as a battle cleric and got hugged by half the crowd on the spot. A boy I used to race through the wheat fields awakened swordsman and had his father lift him onto his shoulders in front of everyone. I stood there while the golden letters spelling out necromancer hung in the air above my head, and I watched the applause die before it had really started, replaced by murmurs and a few outright groans, like the crowd had collectively been cheated out of something they'd been promised. I was 11 years old, standing in the town square, and I heard someone in the crowd say, loud enough for me to hear it, "Poor kid, might as well not have awakened at all." That should have broken me. It almost did. But then something happened that nobody in that square understood, and honestly, at the time, neither did I. When the system asked me to allocate my starting stat points, the standard 20 points every awakened person gets to distribute across strength, agility, intelligence, vitality, and mana, I did something no necromancer is supposed to be able to do. I put every single point into strength. The system should have blocked me. Every scholar, every academy manual, every awakening ceremony official will tell you the same thing. Your class locks your point allocation into a recommended range. A necromancer physically cannot dump 20 points into strength, because the interface won't let the input go through. It's not a rule, it's a wall. A necromancer trying to overinvest in strength gets an error message and a gentle nudge back toward intelligence. The same way water gets pushed back by a dam. For me, there was no wall. The points went in, all 20 of them. And the moment they did, Something inside my chest lit up like a furnace catching fire for the first time, and a new notification appeared in front of me, one that no one else in that square could see, one that made my whole body go cold with a feeling I didn't have a name for yet. Hidden class detected, Warbound Necromancer, lineage of the Bone Reapers, unique stat system unlocked. I didn't understand it then. I barely understand all of it now. But here's what I've pieced together since, and here's the part that changes everything you think you know about this story. Ordinary necromancers grow stronger by feeding mana into their undead. More mana, better skeletons, better shades, bigger armies standing between them and death. That's the whole class fantasy. Summon things to fight for you because you can't fight yourself. Warbound necromancers don't work like that. We were a bloodline that existed hundreds of years before the modern class system standardized everything, back when necromancers fought on the front lines themselves, blade in one hand, death magic in the other. Every kill, every soul that passes through a warbound necromancer's hands doesn't just fuel an undead servant. It feeds directly into the necromancer's own body. Strength, speed, durability, all of it. Compounding, kill after kill, battle after battle, until a warbound necromancer stops needing an army entirely, because the necromancer has become the army. Which is a very poetic way of saying I get stronger every single time I kill something, and after 5 years of dungeon diving alone in the forests outside my village, alone, because nobody wanted to team up with the cursed necromancer kid, I had quietly become something the entire kingdom's class system had no official name for. It didn't happen overnight. The first year, I was still barely stronger than an average untrained teenager, sneaking out past the village boundary to hunt rabbits and low-tier slimes with a kitchen knife I'd stolen from home, terrified every single time that I'd finally found the fight that would kill me. But strength that compounds is a strange, patient kind of power. Every kill added a little more. Every close call taught my body something a classroom never could. By the time I was 13, I could outrun the older boys who used to chase me out of the orchard. By 15, I could drag a felled tree back to the village woodpile by myself, and I told anyone who asked that I'd just gotten lucky with my vitality roll, because admitting the truth felt like handing people a weapon they'd eventually use against me. By the time I turned 16 and received my Ashvane Academy acceptance letter, I had killed more monsters alone in that forest than most licensed academy graduates kill in their entire first 5 years of service, and not one person in my life knew it. I still remember the last thing my mother said to me, the night before she disappeared from our village without a word to anyone, 3 years after that awakening ceremony that made half the town laugh at me. I was 14. She sat on the edge of my bed, brushed the hair back from my forehead the way she used to when I was small, and said something I didn't understand at the time, and have replayed in my head 1,000 times since. "Whatever you become, Soren," she said, "don't let anyone convince you that strength like yours is something to apologize for. Promise me that." I promised. I didn't know what I was promising. Not really. Not at 14, with a village full of people who still called me the cursed necromancer kid behind my back. By morning, she was gone. No note, no explanation, nothing but an empty bed and a hole in my life I'd spent the last 3 years telling myself was abandonment. Plain and simple. One more person deciding I wasn't worth staying for. I trained alone after that. I hid alone after that, and somewhere along the way, I stopped asking why she'd really left, because the answer I'd settled on hurt less than admitting I didn't actually know. Nobody at the academy knew any of this. As far as Ashvane Academy was concerned, I was Soren Duskmere, bottom-ranked necromancer, admitted only because every awakened person in the kingdom is legally guaranteed one seat at a combat academy, and I happened to draw the short straw of showing up at the single most competitive, most bloodline-obsessed academy in the entire country. The first day, I didn't even make it to my dorm room before the whispers started. "That's the necromancer they were talking about." Wait, that's him? I thought he'd at least look intimidating. He looks like he'd fall over in a light breeze. I let them talk. I'd had 5 years of practice letting people talk. What I hadn't had practice with, yet, was Aldrich Thorn. Aldrich is, the golden son of the Thorn family, a bloodline of sword saints going back 4 generations, and the top-ranked first year at Ashvane by a margin so wide, the instructors stopped bothering to rank anyone else in the top 5. He had silver hair he clearly spent more time on than his textbooks, a smile that made half the girls in our year forget how to speak, and exactly 0 patience for anyone he considered beneath him. I met him properly on day 3, during the mandatory class assessment, where every first year has to demonstrate their combat style in front of the instructors and the rest of the cohort. It's supposed to be a formality. Nobody fails it. Nobody's supposed to be humiliated by it. I was humiliated by it anyway, except not the way you'd expect. When my name got called, I walked up expecting to summon a skeleton, get a polite nod from the instructor, and go sit back down. That was the plan. Keep my head down, hide what I actually was for as long as possible, graduate quietly, disappear into a normal life where nobody ever found out what a Warbound Necromancer could really do. Aldrich had other plans. "Instructor, before he wastes everyone's time," Aldrich said, loud enough for the entire assessment hall to hear, "can I request a live demonstration instead? I'll even go easy on him." The instructor, a stern woman named Kesra Vane, one of the few professors at Ashvane who never once looked at me like I was a mistake, hesitated. "That's not standard procedure, Mr. Thorne. Neither is wasting an S-rank academy's time on a necromancer who can barely summon a rat," Aldrich said, and the hall laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud. And that laugh did something to me that 5 years of village whispers never quite managed. It made something in my chest go very, very quiet and very, very cold. "Fine," I said, before Instructor Vane could stop it. "Let's do it." I should have known that would end badly for somebody. I just assumed it would be me. It wasn't. Aldrich came at me with a sword strike calibrated to look impressive without actually hurting me. A showman's move, meant to end with his blade an inch from my throat, while the crowd gasped at his control. I know that now. At the time, all I knew was that a sword was coming at my neck at a speed that should have killed an ordinary person, and 5 years of alone in the forest instinct took over before my brain caught up with my body. I caught the blade between 2 fingers. The hall went silent, the way rooms go silent right before something breaks. Aldrich's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It cracked, just for a second, confusion breaking through the practiced arrogance, like his entire understanding of the world had just gotten a splinter in it. He yanked the sword back. I let it go. My fingers weren't even scratched. "That was..." he started. "Luck," I said quickly, because 5 years of hiding doesn't just switch off in 1 second, and panic was screaming at me to bury this. Bury it now. Bury it deep. "You pulled the strike. I got lucky." Instructor Vane's eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything, but she was watching me differently after that, and I had the horrible feeling that luck wasn't going to cover this for much longer. It didn't, not even close. Word got around the dorms by dinner, not the true version. Nobody believed a necromancer had actually caught Aldrich Thorne's blade on purpose, so the story mutated into something safer for everyone's worldview. Aldrich slipped. Aldrich was showing off and misjudged the distance. The necromancer got lucky, and everyone's overreacting. By the time I sat down alone at the end of the dining hall, like always, the incident had already been reshaped into something that let the world keep making sense. Everyone except one person. "You're not as weak as you're pretending to be," said a voice above me, and I looked up to find Milo Cross standing there with a tray in his hands, and the nervous, hopeful expression of someone who's about to either make a friend or get humiliated trying. Milo was the only other necromancer in our year. Skinny, twitchy, brilliant with theory, and useless in a fight. Exactly what a necromancer is supposed to be, according to every textbook ever written. He'd been getting his own share of whispers since day 1, and I think some part of him had been hoping I'd be an ally against all of it. Instead, watching me almost expose myself in front of the entire assessment hall had apparently convinced him I was hiding something enormous. "Sit down before someone hears you," I said, which wasn't a denial, and Milo's eyes lit up like I'd just confirmed every theory he'd been quietly building since day 1. That's how it started, not a grand alliance, just 2 outcast necromancers sharing a table nobody else wanted. and one of them slowly figuring out that the other one was sitting on a secret big enough to flip the entire academy's hierarchy on its head. Over the next 2 weeks, Milo made it his personal mission to catalog every small thing I did that wasn't necromancer behavior. As he put it, scribbling notes in a battered journal he thought I hadn't noticed him carrying everywhere. The way I could carry both our packs on training hikes without breaking a sweat. The way I never got winded during the academy's mandatory endurance runs, even when I was pretending to lag behind on purpose. The way I flinched every single time when a drill instructor called on me to demonstrate a summon in front of the class. Because summoning a low-tier skeleton at full strength meant using maybe 1% of what I actually had, and every ounce of me hated how small that felt. "You're bored," Milo said one night, watching me half-heartedly raise a training skeleton that immediately fell apart the second it stood up, the way I'd learned to make them do on purpose so nobody would ask questions. "You're not struggling, you're bored out of your mind." "I'm exactly as bad at this as everyone thinks I am," I said. "Sure," Milo said, in a tone that meant he believed exactly none of it, and went back to his notes. The daily humiliations didn't stop just because I had one friend in my corner. If anything, they got sharper, because Aldrich's circle had decided my table with Milo was an easy target for jokes that cost them nothing and cost me a slow, grinding kind of exhaustion I never let show on my face. Someone accidentally knocked my books into a fountain. Someone left a plastic toy skeleton on my dorm room door with a note that said maybe next time. During combat theory, a senior student made a show of asking Instructor Vane, in front of the whole class, why the academy even bothered letting necromancers take the physical conditioning course, since it wasn't like any of us would need the muscle. I sat there and took it, every single time, because taking it quietly was cheaper than the alternative, and the alternative was a secret I still wasn't ready to spend. I told myself I'd keep hiding. I told myself the assessment hall incident was a one-time slip, a fluke born out of anger, and that I'd be more careful from now on. I actually believed that for about 2 weeks. Then the first field trial happened, and hiding stopped being an option. Field trials at Ashvane aren't gentle. Twice a semester, first years get shipped out to a monitored dungeon zone and split into small teams to clear low-tier monster nests, both as a graduation requirement and as a very public, very competitive way for the academy to rank its students in front of visiting nobles and future employers. Teams are assigned, nobody picks their own partners, and through what I'm fairly sure was deliberate cruelty from someone in administration who thought it would be character building, I got placed on Aldrich Thorne's team. "Try not to slow us down," Aldrich said as our group approached the dungeon gate, not even looking at me. Behind him stood the rest of our team, 2 solid mid-tier students, and a girl I hadn't spoken to yet, though I'd noticed her before. Everyone had noticed her before. Leora Vantis. Ice Affinity Mage, top 3 in our year. The kind of quiet, controlled talent that made instructors nod approvingly instead of gushing, because gushing felt beneath her precision. She had the kind of reputation where people assumed she was cold before they'd even spoken to her, mostly because she rarely bothered correcting them. She looked at me for exactly 1 second before the gate opened. "Stay behind us," she said. Not cruel, just practical, the way you'd tell a child to stay away from a fire. I didn't blame her. As far as she knew, that's exactly what I was. The dungeon zone was supposed to be low risk. Tier 2 nest, mostly corrupted wolves and the occasional armored boar. Nothing a coordinated team of first years couldn't handle with some effort. That's what the briefing said. The briefing was wrong. 20 minutes in, we hit a nest that had been mismarked, and instead of Tier 2 wolves, we walked straight into a Tier 4 Ashback warg pack. Bigger, faster, and smart enough to flank instead of charging in a straight line, which is exactly what they did the moment they smelled 5 terrified first years standing in their territory. I heard them before I saw them, a low growl rolling out from 3 different directions at once, which is the exact moment you realize a fight isn't going to be a fight, it's going to be a trap closing shut. The 2 mid-tier students on our team, a boy named Ferris and a girl whose name I never even learned properly, went down fast, pinned and bleeding within the first 10 seconds, and I watched Aldrich's confident battle stance crack for the second time that week as he realized this wasn't a controlled exercise anymore. Ferris is bleeding out. Someone needs to. Leora's voice cut off as she threw up an ice wall to buy time, sweat already beading on her forehead from the strain of holding a barrier against 3 separate impacts at once. But the wargs were smart. They didn't waste themselves throwing bodies at solid ice. They circled, testing the edges, finding the gap where the wall met the tree line, and I watched, frozen for exactly 1 second too long, as the biggest one of the pack, easily twice the size of the others, scarred along one flank in a way that told me it had survived fights that should have killed it, slipped through that gap with its eyes locked on Leora's exposed back. "We need to fall back," Aldrich shouted, sword shaking in his grip in a way it never had during any drill or exhibition, and for the first time since I'd met him, he sounded like exactly what he was, a 17-year-old kid who'd never actually fought for his life before, dropped into a situation his training had never prepared him for. I had a choice in that moment, a real one. Keep hiding. Let the weak necromancer cover intact. Maybe get hurt, maybe get someone else hurt, and preserve the secret I'd spent 5 years protecting. Or stop hiding. I stopped hiding. I stepped in front of Leora's cracking ice wall as the lead warg lunged, and I caught it out of the air with both hands, its jaws snapping an inch from my face, close enough that I felt its breath. Close enough that some distant, terrified part of my brain screamed that this was exactly the kind of moment that ended necromancers' lives in every story I'd ever heard growing up. That part of my brain was wrong. It had been wrong about me for 5 years. I threw it, actually threw a 400-pound Tier 4 monster, both hands closing around its throat and shoulders and just moving, the way I'd move a training dummy back in the forest clearings nobody knew I trained in, and it sailed backward into the 2 wargs coming up behind it, and all 3 of them went down in a tangle of fur and broken bone, and a sound none of us were prepared to hear. The remaining 2 wargs didn't hesitate. They should have. That was their mistake. One came for my exposed left side while I was still turning, and instead of dodging, I planted my feet and drove my fist into its skull the moment it left the ground, and it simply stopped moving, mid-air, and dropped. The last one skidded to a halt 10 feet away, ears flat, every instinct in its body screaming at it that the math on this fight had just changed completely, and it turned and ran into the tree line, rather than test whatever I was. Nobody said anything. For 3 full seconds, the only sound in that dungeon was my own breathing and the whimpering of a warg with a snapped leg. "What," Aldrich said, very slowly, "was that?" I didn't have a clean lie left. Not this time. Not with 2 students bleeding on the ground and 3 monsters that should have killed all of us lying broken in front of me instead. "That," I said, "is why you should have listened when I said I'd handle myself." The remaining wargs didn't come back after that. Smart animals don't stick around after watching their pack leader get launched 15 feet by something that isn't supposed to be able to do that. We got the 2 injured students stabilized, got everyone back through the gate, and the entire walk back to the academy happened in a silence so thick I could have cut it with a butter knife. Leora broke it first, once we were alone near the medical wing, waiting for news on our teammates. "You've been holding back," she said. Not a question. "Everyone holds back something," I said. "Not like that." She studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not fear exactly, and not the pity I was used to either. Something closer to recalculation, like she was redrawing a map she'd thought was finished. Necromancers don't throw Tier 4 monsters. Necromancers don't catch swords. "What are you?" "Tired of being underestimated," I said, which was true, and also not an answer, and she seemed to understand that I wasn't ready to give her the real one yet. That should have been the end of the danger for the week. It wasn't. 2 nights later, walking back from the library after curfew because I'd lost track of time rereading a combat manual instructor Vane had quietly recommended, 3 third-years stepped out of the shadows near the training courtyard, and I knew immediately this wasn't a coincidence. Third-years don't wander that part of campus after dark for no reason, and the way they spread out to block all 3 exits told me everything I needed to know about how carefully this had been planned. "Heard you threw a warg 15 feet, the tallest one said, cracking his knuckles with the exaggerated casualness of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. Figured we'd see if that was true, or if first years just exaggerate everything these days. Go back to your dorm, I said. I'm not interested. Wasn't a request, he said, and threw the first punch. I could have ended it in half a second. I didn't. Some small, stubborn part of me still wasn't ready to let the full truth out in an unwitnessed courtyard where the story could get twisted into something ugly by morning. So instead, I did the thing I'd gotten disturbingly good at over 5 years. I fought just hard enough to win, and no harder. I let the first punch graze past me instead of catching it outright. I redirected the second attacker into the third, with a shove that looked almost accidental. By the time it was over, all 3 of them were sitting in the dirt, bruised and furious, and thoroughly confused about how a scrawny necromancer had just handled them without breaking a visible sweat. This isn't over, the tall one spat, nursing a split lip. It really is, I said, and walked away before he could decide otherwise. I didn't report it, neither did they, which told me everything about how humiliating they found losing to me in the first place. But word travels in a school full of bored, competitive teenagers, no matter how quiet everyone tries to be about it, and by the end of the week, the version of the story circulating had grown from the necromancer threw a warg to the necromancer put 3 third years in the dirt without breaking a sweat. And this time, almost nobody was calling it luck anymore. Word of the field trial spread through the academy faster than the assessment hall incident ever had, because this time there were witnesses who couldn't be talked out of what they'd seen. 2 injured students, a pack leader thrown 15 feet, a necromancer who apparently wasn't supposed to be capable of any of it. Rumors are strange things. They don't just spread, they compete, different versions fighting for dominance until one wins out. By the end of the week, 3 separate stories were circulating about what had actually happened in that dungeon. Some said I'd used a forbidden ritual. Some said Aldrich had exaggerated everything to cover his own panic, and a smaller, quieter version, the one that turned out to be closest to true, started saying that maybe, just maybe, the academy had a hidden bloodline sitting in its bottom-ranked class, and nobody had noticed yet. Instructor Vane noticed. She pulled me aside after the following week's combat theory lecture, closed the door of her office, and set a very old, very worn book on the desk between us. I've taught at this academy for 11 years, she said. I've seen exactly one other student move the way you moved, in that dungeon report. She tapped the book's cover, and I read the faded title stamped into the leather. Bloodlines of the Old War, Warbound Orders and Their Fall. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I'm not going to report this, she said, before I could even think about lying again. Not yet, but I want you to understand something, Soren, and I want you to understand it clearly. Whatever you are, this academy has students in it who will not react well to finding out a necromancer outclasses them. Some of them have families with real power. Some of them will see you as a threat to be handled quietly instead of a talent to be respected. What happened to them? I asked, nodding at the book. The Warbound Orders. It says they fell. Something crossed her face then, quick and guarded, gone almost before I caught it. They were hunted, she said simply. 2 centuries ago, when the modern class system was first standardized, a handful of kingdom-level powers decided bloodlines that couldn't be predicted or controlled were bloodlines that shouldn't exist. The Warbound Orders didn't fit the new system. They got erased from it instead. She met my eyes, and for a moment there was something almost like grief sitting behind her usual composure. Officially, the line died out completely. I would have believed that myself, right up until I watched you catch a stone golem's fist in a training exhibition. That's not exactly reassuring, I said. It wasn't meant to be, she said. It was meant to be honest. You're going to need people around you who are honest with you, Soren, because I promise you, not everyone who comes looking for a warbound bloodline is going to have your best interests in mind. She closed the book. You survived hiding for 5 years. Hiding is over now. What matters is what you do next. That should have been the beginning of things getting easier. It wasn't. Aldrich Thorne does not handle being outclassed well. I learned exactly how badly during a sparring exhibition 3 weeks after the dungeon incident when he requested, loudly, publicly, in front of an instructor who couldn't refuse without looking like she was protecting me. A friendly rematch, to prove the golem incident and the dungeon report had both been flukes stacked on top of each other. I said no, he asked again, in front of enough people that saying no a second time would have looked exactly like confirmation of everything the rumors were already whispering. So I said yes, and I spent the entire match doing something that cost me more than the fight itself. I let him win. Barely. Convincingly enough that the crowd bought it. Close enough that Aldrich himself walked away, satisfied his reputation was intact, and I walked away feeling like I'd swallowed glass. Because losing on purpose to protect a secret felt worse, somehow, than 5 years of losing for real ever had. Milo cornered me afterward, furious in a way I'd never seen the usually gentle, nervous boy get. You threw that. I don't know what you're talking about. Soren, his voice cracked. Somewhere between frustration and something that sounded almost like heartbreak on my behalf. I watched you not lose to a golem's fist. I watched you throw a tier 4 warg 15 feet. You do not lose to Aldrich Thorn in a sparring match unless you decide to. Why would you decide to? I didn't have a clean answer for him, not one that made sense out loud. The truth was messier than anything I could put into words that night. That hiding had become such an ingrained instinct that even after the dungeon, even after the golem, some cornered animal part of me still reached for the smallest, safest version of myself the second enough eyes turned my way at once. Milo didn't push further. He just looked at me with something that wasn't quite disappointment, more like worry, and said, "One day you're going to have to stop deciding to lose," before walking off toward the dorms, leaving me alone in the courtyard with that sentence echoing louder than I wanted it to. He was right, obviously. It just took the tournament bracket announcement to actually make me listen. I learned that firsthand over the following month, as the golden son of House Thorn went from ignoring me to actively hunting for ways to expose or embarrass me in front of the entire student body, convinced, correctly, as it turned out, that there was something bigger going on than one lucky dungeon moment. He wasn't the only one paying attention either. Leora started sitting with Milo and me at lunch, first out of what I assumed was curiosity, then, as the weeks went on, out of something that felt less like investigation and more like genuine company. She never pushed for the full truth. She just watched and waited, and occasionally said things like, "You're stronger than you're letting on again," whenever I flinched at holding back too visibly during sparring drills, like she was giving me permission to stop pretending in front of her specifically, one careful inch at a time. I should have seen the trap coming. I really should have. It came wrapped as an invitation, the Ashvane Autumn Tournament, the biggest event on the Academy calendar, where the top 16 first years compete in single elimination duels in front of visiting nobility, Academy sponsors, and half the kingdom's future employers. Ranking into the tournament is normally reserved for the top students in the year. Necromancers, historically, never qualify. The class simply isn't built for one-on-one dueling. I qualified anyway. 16th seed, dead last, practically an afterthought. Except the moment the brackets went up on the announcement board, a very specific detail sent a ripple through the entire school. My first match was against Aldrich Thorn. 2nd seed, Sword Saint bloodline. The boy who had spent a month trying to find a crack in my secret and had turned up nothing but growing frustration. And now the whole academy would get to watch, live, in front of nobility and sponsors, and everyone who'd ever laughed at me in a hallway. Exactly what happened when a Warbound Necromancer stopped pretending. Aldrich found me the night before the match, alone in the training courtyard, and for once he wasn't performing for an audience. It was just the two of us and the cold autumn air. "I know you're hiding something," he said. "I don't know what, but tomorrow I'm going to find out in front of everyone, and I need you to know something before that happens." He met my eyes, and for the first time since I'd known him, there wasn't a trace of arrogance in his voice. "My family expects me to win everything. Every match, every tournament, every year, since I was 6 years old. I have never once been allowed to lose to someone they'd consider beneath me. If you beat me tomorrow, you're not just embarrassing me, you're embarrassing House Thorn, in front of the exact people my family cares most about impressing." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It's a warning," he said, "because my family doesn't lose gracefully. And if you humiliate me tomorrow, you need to understand that whatever happens after that match won't be about a school tournament anymore." He walked away before I could answer, and I stood alone in that courtyard for a long time afterward, staring up at the same stars I used to sleep under during 5 years of solo dungeon runs, wondering if I'd finally, truly, run out of room to hide. The 2 weeks leading up to that conversation had been the strangest of my entire life, because for the first time since Class Awakening Day, I wasn't training alone. Milo insisted on drilling me on tournament rules and scoring every evening, convinced that if I was going to reveal everything in one match, I might as well do it without losing on a technicality. Leora started showing up to the training courtyard after her own practice ended, not to spar. She was smart enough to know an ice mage sparring against whatever I actually was would end in someone's hospitalization, but to run drills alongside me, pushing her own limits in a way that made it feel less like watching and more like training together. "You've been fighting like you're still trying not to be noticed," she said one evening, watching me pull a punch against a training dummy hard enough that the dummy barely rocked. "Even now, even after the dungeon." "Old habits," I said. "Break it," she said. "Whatever you're planning to show everyone tomorrow, do it completely or don't do it at all. Half a secret is worse than none." I didn't tell her she was right, but I trained differently after that, harder, honestly. I let myself hit the dummy the way I actually could, and watched 5 years of restraint splinter clean through solid oak in a single strike, and something in my chest that had been clenched tight since I was 11 years old finally, quietly, let go. Instructor Vane found me afterward, staring at the wreckage of the training dummy with an expression I couldn't quite name. She didn't scold me for the damage, she just studied the wreckage, then studied me, and said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, Soren, you should know that some of us have been waiting a long time to see a Duskmere stop apologizing for what they are." She didn't explain the comment. I didn't get the chance to ask what she meant by it, not then. That answer, I'd learn, was still chapters away. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay staring at the ceiling of my dorm room, listening to the wind outside, and for the first time in years, I let myself actually think about my mother's voice instead of pushing it away the second it surfaced. "Don't let anyone convince you that strength like yours is something to apologize for." I'd spent 3 years since she disappeared assuming that promise had died with her leaving, one more piece of a childhood that hadn't survived contact with reality. Lying there, hours before I was supposed to fight Aldrich Thorn in front of the entire kingdom, I finally understood it differently. Maybe I hadn't broken that promise by hiding. Maybe I'd just been taking the long way around to finally keeping it. Neither did Milo, apparently, because I found him waiting outside my dorm at dawn, with 2 cups of overbrewed tea, and an expression that was trying very hard to look confident, and failing completely. "You're going to win," he said. "You don't know that." "I don't," he agreed. "But I know you've been holding back so hard for so long that I don't think even you know what you look like at full strength. Maybe it's time to find out. In front of everyone, since apparently that's happening whether you want it to or not." Leora found me an hour later, in the corridor outside the arena's competitor entrance, and unlike Milo, she didn't offer encouragement. She just studied me for a long moment, the way she always did, like she was reading a page she'd almost finished translating. "Whatever you're about to show everyone," she said quietly, "I already decided it doesn't change what I think of you. I wanted you to know that before you walked in there." Then she turned and left before I could figure out how to respond to that, which was probably exactly her intention, because I spent the next 10 minutes standing in that corridor with my heart doing something it had never quite done before, and it had nothing to do with the fight ahead. The arena was packed, every seat filled, standing room gone within the first 20 minutes, banners from noble houses hanging along the upper tier, and somewhere up in the sponsor box, representatives from 3 different kingdom guilds sat with notebooks open, ready to write down names worth remembering. Aldrich walked out to applause that shook the stands. I walked out to a silence that felt almost respectful, in the specific way silence gets when a crowd genuinely has no idea what they're about to watch, and hasn't decided yet whether to be entertained or embarrassed on my behalf. "Begin," the referee called, and Aldrich didn't waste a second. He came at me with everything. No showman's restraint this time. No calibrated strike meant to look impressive without landing. This was a sword saint fighting like his family's name was actually on the line, which it was. And for the first 3 exchanges, I let him think it was working. I dodged instead of blocking. I retreated instead of striking back. I let the crowd start murmuring that maybe the 16th seed really was about to get crushed after all, exactly the way everyone had assumed from the start. "Come on," Aldrich muttered, low enough that only I could hear it, frustration creeping into his voice as his 3rd strike sailed past me for the 3rd time. "Fight back. Stop running." I almost laughed. I wasn't running. I was measuring him, his footwork, the tiny hitch in his shoulder before every real strike, the way he favored his right side when he got frustrated. All the small details 5 years of solo survival had trained me to notice instinctively in anyone trying to kill me. Aldrich wasn't trying to kill me, but some habits don't know the difference between a tournament and a warg pack, and by the 4th exchange, I understood this fight completely. Up in the stands, I could hear individual voices now, the crowd's murmur sharpening into something almost cruel. "Told you he'd fold." 16th seed, what did anyone expect? Somewhere in that noise, I thought I heard Milo shouting something encouraging, and I thought I caught, just barely, Leora's voice cutting clean through the rest of it. "He's not losing. Watch him." And that's when the real problem started, except the problem wasn't for me. Aldrich's 4th strike came in high, a finishing arc meant to end the match in a single decisive blow in front of every noble house watching, and I stopped holding back. I caught the blade with one hand. I didn't throw it aside this time. I held it. Aldrich threw everything he had into pushing that sword forward, sword saint bloodlines screaming through every muscle in his arm, and the blade didn't move a single inch. "You want to know what I've been hiding?" I said, quiet enough that only he could hear it. "You're about to find out exactly what it costs you." I twisted the blade out of his grip and let it clatter to the arena floor, and before the sound had even finished echoing off the stands, I closed the distance and put him on his back with a single open palm strike to the chest. Controlled, deliberate, hard enough to end the match without doing real damage. Because whatever Aldrich had done to me over the past month, I wasn't interested in becoming the villain of my own story on the day I finally stopped hiding. The referee's count barely finished before the arena exploded into noise. Half shock, half disbelief. A few scattered cheers from students who'd apparently been quietly rooting for the underdog the whole time, and finally had a reason to say so out loud. Somewhere up near the front row, I heard Milo's voice crack completely on my name, and somewhere just behind him, I caught one clear glimpse of Leora, on her feet with everyone else, not cheering, just watching me with an expression I'd remember long after that day ended. Up in the sponsor box, I watched 3 different guild representatives stand up out of their seats at the exact same moment. Notebooks already open, pens already moving. Aldrich lay on his back, staring up at me, and for once there was no arrogance left in his expression at all. Just a raw, stripped-down kind of shock, the look of someone whose entire understanding of where he stood in the world had just been rewritten in front of everyone whose opinion mattered most to him. In the stands, I could see the exact moment his family's box went silent, the exact moment his father's proud, expectant expression curdled into something colder. "How," he said. Just that. One word. "I told you," I said, offering him a hand up that he stared at for a long moment before finally taking. Everyone holds back something. He got to his feet slowly, brushing dust off his tunic, and for a moment, I braced for the old arrogance to snap back into place. Some excuse about an off day or a lucky opening. It didn't come. 5 years, he said quietly, just for me. You've been holding this back for 5 years, and you let me spend a month treating you like garbage anyway. Yeah, I said. That's either the most patient thing I've ever seen, or the stupidest, he said, and something that wasn't quite a smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. I haven't decided which yet. Let me know when you figure it out, I said, and for the first time since I'd met him, Aldrich Thorne actually laughed. A short, surprised, genuine sound that had nothing performative in it at all. I thought that was the climax. I really did. I thought beating Aldrich Thorne in front of the entire kingdom's noble houses was the biggest moment this story had left to give me. The payoff 5 years of hiding in forests alone had been building toward. Win the match, reveal the secret, watch the world recalibrate around what I actually was. I had no idea what was coming next. The applause hadn't even fully died down when the arena's ambient wards flickered, a subtle shift in the magical pressure of the room that only the trained instructors seemed to notice immediately, judging by how fast Instructor Vane's head snapped toward the sponsor box. A tall figure in dark ceremonial robes rose from the seats reserved for kingdom-level observers. Not a guild representative, not a noble house delegate, someone whose presence made every instructor in the arena go rigid at once. Impressive, the figure said, voice carrying easily across the entire stadium without seeming to raise itself at all. A warbound bloodline, awakened naturally, after 200 years of believing the line had gone extinct. The figure's eyes found mine directly, cutting through the crowd like the rest of the arena didn't exist. The Directorate will be very interested in meeting you, Mr. Duskmere. Very interested indeed. The name hit the crowd like a physical blow. I didn't know what the Directorate was yet. Not really. Not beyond the fragments of rumor I'd catch over the following days. Whispers about a kingdom-spanning organization that hunted down rare bloodlines and recruited them, whether they wanted to be recruited or not. Whispers that made even Instructor Vane's normally steady expression go tight and careful. I looked up at the figure still standing in the sponsor box, robes shifting despite the complete lack of wind in the arena, and felt something cold settle low in my stomach, a feeling 5 years of forest dungeons had taught me to take seriously. "Who are you?" I said, not quite a question, more a demand, and the figure's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Envoy Corwin Ash," he said, descending the stands with unhurried steps that somehow made the entire crowd part around him without anyone visibly moving. Consider today the first time in 200 years the Directorate has confirmed a true warbound line still walking free in this kingdom. He stopped at the edge of the arena floor, close enough now that I could see his eyes weren't quite the right color, an unsettling shade somewhere between gray and something that didn't have a name. "You should be proud, Mr. Duskmere. Bloodlines like yours don't announce themselves twice a century." "And if I'm not interested in being found?" I said. "Everyone says that," Envoy Ash replied, almost gently, "right up until they understand what being found actually offers them." He inclined his head, a gesture that managed to feel more like a warning than a courtesy. "We'll speak again soon. I imagine you have quite a lot of questions, and I promise you, Mr. Duskmere, every single one of them has an answer you are not going to like hearing alone." But I understood the tone. I understood the way 3 guild representatives who'd been ready to offer me contracts a minute earlier suddenly sat back down without a word. I understood the way Leora's hand found my arm without either of us discussing it, quiet and certain, like she already knew exactly what kind of storm had just started forming over my head. Milo reached us a moment later, out of breath from pushing through the crowd, his earlier excitement completely replaced by something tighter, more worried. "That's not a guild representative," he said quietly, eyes still fixed on where Envoy Ash had been standing. "I've read about the Directorate. They don't recruit people, Soren, they collect them." "Collect," I repeated. "Bloodlines, artifacts, anything rare enough to be useful and rare enough that nobody powerful enough to stop them." Milo swallowed hard. "I need to check something in the archive. Tonight. I don't like what I'm thinking right now." Aldrich, still catching his breath from the match, looked between the 3 of us with an expression that had shifted, in the space of 10 minutes, from stunned rival to something closer to genuine concern. "Whatever this is," he said, "you're not dealing with it alone. I don't care what my family thinks about that. I'd spent 5 years hiding what I was from a village that would have mocked me for it. I had absolutely no idea, walking out of that arena, that the world I'd just revealed myself to was about to be so much more dangerous than the one I'd been hiding from." I looked around at them. Milo, already halfway into planning mode despite the fear still written across his face. Aldrich, standing beside me instead of against me for the first time since we'd met. And Leora, still holding my arm like she had no intention of letting go anytime soon. And for the first time since that golden light had settled over my shoulders in a village square 5 years ago, I didn't feel like the cursed necromancer kid nobody wanted standing next to them. I felt like someone worth an entire kingdom's attention. Whether that was a blessing or a countdown, I still didn't know. I was about to find out. And that was when I realized this wasn't the end of the story at all. It was only the beginning.